Hey there, I am Tamarah Rockwood, CEO and co-founder of the still young and up-and-coming Pacific Northwest poetry publishing house, Bainbridge Island Press, along with my husband, Ben Rockwood. We launched this publishing house in December of 2022, and as of today, we have successfully and happily published 9 stunning, gorgeous poetry books already, ranging from individual collections of poetry to international poetry anthologies. We have spent the past 2 years collecting poetry, meeting debut poets and established poets. We've visited book festivals. We've hosted a number of poetry readings. We have put poetry books into hands and poetry into hearts. And now we are starting a podcast. POETICS podcast by Bainbridge Island Press will be 10 minutes per episode, so half a TED Talk. January 1st, we're launching a series of podcasts composed of Wednesday podcast episodes with our own poets. Saturday episodes will be with surprising guests. But in the meantime, while we get everything organized during the next 2 months, Ben and I will be exploring really interesting poetry here and just really enjoying the beauty and scope of poetry and what it is saying and why is it saying it and who is saying it and is it important? How is it relevant? I am so excited to be here and to launch our debut POETICS podcast. It is a privilege to be here to discuss poetry with both poets and poetry enthusiasts. So, before I get into anything, before we read poetry, I want to just touch on why we are doing this. Why am I doing this? Why poetry? Poetry holds a very special place in my heart. It is an ancient form of writing. I think it is the most ancient form of writing. Thousands of years ago, before typewriters, before Gutenberg, before papyrus, before the cuneiform, there were prophets and mystics who would recite dreams and visions. These dreams and visions would tell communities about the seasons, about astronomy, about harvests, about community, about what it means to be human. We have always sought meaning and direction in life. What does it mean to live? What does it mean to be in love? What does it mean to grieve? From this ancient language of meaning, from these dreams and visions across every continent and every society and culture in history of Earth, we understand big ideas through the power of figurative language. It is possible to understand the scale of love through similes. We understand the depth of grief through metaphors. This language developed the shape of poetry. And when I think of what poetry should look like, I think about how many phases poetry has gone through. From folk lyrics to epic war poetry to love poetry to personal narratives, poetry has taken on many forms over time. I would like to think that poetry is also universally loved. I would like to think that. However, Plato, who I'm sure was rarely ever wrong, explained in his philosophies and polemics why he believed that poetry was rubbish. It was rubbish because it wasn't truth. Poetry corrupted the youth. It was a deviation of the truth because of the language that poetry used. A heart is not a red, red rose. A grieving mother is not a stone. Aristotle later upheld the banner of poetry and defiantly declared in his treatise Poetics that the greatest thing by far is to have a command of metaphor. This alone cannot be imparted by another. It is the mark of genius. And more importantly, the poet should prefer probable impossibilities to improbable possibilities. So here, when we read the poems from old or from contemporary sources, I am looking at them through the lens of the long journey of poetry. I firmly believe that we are reading the aesthetic of beauty and we are reading truth. Poets are writing their human experiences. We poets are sharing our truths through the ancient language of poetry. How can we fully understand love without the bloom of the rose? How can we understand the weight of grief without the stone? This language that we poets use to describe our own human condition is what we are preserving when we write, and we learn about ourselves when we read. Poetry is important. Poetry is relevant, not only to us now, but to those who have written about those who are no longer with us, so that we can preserve their legacy and memory of ourselves, but also for the future generations who will be searching for meaning and answers to the human experience of living. The vernacular language that our children will be using in 20 years is not the language we are using today. And by preserving the legacy of language, we are keeping this earth connected. We are keeping our connection growing and thriving. We are keeping the meaning of life alive and cared for. This is what hope looks like. Poetry is truth. Poetry is love. Poetry is essential to our lives, and we are grateful to bring poetry to you through our books and through this podcast. Thank you for being here with us to celebrate this human experience together. So today is Wednesday, and the poem for today is a poem that I wrote and I had published through the Galway Review in Ireland, Galway's leading literary magazine. I intend for this, among a number of other poems I have lined up, to be in my third poetry collection, and it is so far titled Love Calypso. This poem is titled Actually. Actually. Let's define it. It is an adverb. It ends in ly. It is an action. Actually, let me explain it. It is a sound. It is a moment. It is the volta in a sonnet. Actually, I feel it, like it is waking up in a new room, or it is like smelling a cologne from my grandfather's neck, or it is like when you have stared a little too long, or when you have smiled a little too big, or it is like learning something new, something that is actually true. No, but actually, it is when the ship left to cross the waters. It is when the foot left to step the threshold. It is when the mouth opened to say goodbye, but actually the foot did not step, the mouth did not speak, and the ship was set on fire by a rocket. Actually, this is not a dictionary, and we are not reading a definition of anything. We are turning our words into a new truth. Okay, that is all for today, poetry friends. If you've enjoyed diving into the world of verse with us, please join us next time. We have got more poets to meet, more poems to explore, and more literary adventures to share. Until then, keep reading, keep writing, and keep poetry close to your heart. Thank you for joining POETICS podcast, where we bring poetry to life, one verse at a time.